The ducks moved before sunrise. Across a flooded paddy field in Zhejiang province, a low, rolling wave of feathers and bills swept through shallow water. Not dozens, not hundreds, 100,000 ducks released at dawn into a single coordinated operation across the region. By the time the sun cleared the Swiss hills, they were already working. This was not a wildlife event. It was agriculture. Deliberate, calculated, and stranger than almost anyone expected. China grows more rice than any nation on Earth. In 2023, that figure reached 212 million metric tons, enough to feed more than 1 billion people for a full year. But behind that number sits a quiet crisis that has been building for decades. The insects are winning, and the chemicals meant to stop them are failing. Rice planthopper, stem borer, brown spot fungus. These are not abstract threats. They cost Chinese farmers billions of yuan every season. In response, Chinese agriculture developed one of the most chemically intensive farming systems ever seen. By the early 2000s, China was using roughly 1.8 times more pesticides per hectare than the global average. The soil was thinning, the water was turning, and the yields, after decades of chemical inputs, had begun to plateau. Something had to change. What arrived was not a new molecule or a new machine. It was an animal that had been walking rice paddies for 4,000 years. The relationship between ducks and rice is not a modern invention. Farmers in the Zhejiang and Fujian regions of China have documented versions of this practice since at least the 17th century. A duck in a flooded paddy is a biological machine with very specific behaviors. It forages at the waterline. It consumes insects, snails, and weeds with relentless consistency. Its feet stir the mud, aerating the soil and releasing trapped nitrogen. Its droppings fertilize the water directly in real time. For centuries, small-scale farmers kept a few dozen ducks per field. The system worked. Then the Green Revolution arrived. Between the 1960s and 1980s, high-yield rice varieties transformed Asian agriculture. Yields tripled, but the new crops demanded new inputs: synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides. Ducks were incompatible with chemical farming. You couldn't release animals into fields drenched in toxins. So the ducks disappeared. The chemicals took over. And for a generation, no one thought much about what had been lost. Then a Japanese farmer named Takao Furuno changed everything. In 1992, Furuno was struggling. His farm in Fukuoka Prefecture was producing rice, but barely at a profit. Chemical costs were rising. His soil was degrading. On a hunch rooted in old farming lore, he released a small flock of ducks into his paddy fields and watched what happened. The results unsettled him. Not because they failed, but because they worked beyond anything he had modeled. Weed pressure dropped by over 90% without a single application of herbicide. Insect damage fell to near zero. His soil biology began to recover within a single season, and his input costs collapsed. Furuno spent the next decade refining the system, introducing ducklings at exactly 10 days old, young enough to move between rice stalks without damaging them, old enough to forage effectively. He documented everything. In 2001, he published The Power of Duck, a farming manual that circulated quietly through agricultural research communities across Asia. Chinese researchers were paying close attention. By 2004, a team at Zhejiang University had begun the first formal large-scale trials of what they called rice-duck integrated farming. The numbers they generated were striking. Fields managed with ducks required 60 to 80% less pesticide than conventional plots. Nitrogen fertilizer use dropped by up to 40%. Rice yields remained equal, and in some cases improved compared to chemically managed fields. The water in duck-integrated paddies showed measurable reductions in phosphorus and nitrogen runoff. The surrounding soil communities showed higher microbial diversity. These were not marginal improvements. They were transformations. But the Chinese Agricultural Ministry faced a coordination problem that Furunos, with his single farm, had never encountered. Scaling a duck-based system across a province, let alone a nation, required timing, logistics, and a kind of biological precision that industrial farming had never been asked to apply before. You had to source the right breed. You had to hatch and raise millions of ducklings on synchronized schedules. You had to release them at the exact developmental window when rice plants were too thick for ducks to trample but tall enough to provide shelter. Too early, and the ducks destroy the crop. Too late, and the pests have already arrived. The margin was days, sometimes hours. The breed chosen for most Chinese operations is the small-bodied Indian runner duck, long-necked, upright, capable of sustained foraging movement across flooded ground. An adult Indian runner can consume up to 200 insects per day in a paddy environment. A flock of 1,000 ducks working a hectare can suppress planthopper populations by roughly 85% within 2 weeks. That figure comes from field data collected by the Zhejiang Academy of Agricultural Sciences across trials running from 2008 to 2015. 1 million ducks, working in coordinated flocks across multiple provinces, represented a pest suppression force that no synthetic chemical could match, and one that renewed itself biologically, cost-effectively, and without leaving residues in the grain. But the story did not stay clean for long. Here is where the account grows more complicated. The operation that drew international attention in 2019 was not a quiet academic trial. It was a state-coordinated agricultural deployment. The Chinese government, responding to a catastrophic locust outbreak that had devastated crops across Pakistan, India, and parts of East Africa, announced the mobilization of approximately 100,000 ducks as a first response measure to protect Xinjiang province's borders. The locusts had not yet crossed into China. The ducks were positioned as a defensive biological barrier. The announcement ricocheted around the world. Reporting ranged from precise to absurd. Headlines described 1 million ducks dispatched to eat locusts. Social media amplified the figure. Scientists expressed admiration and skepticism in almost equal measure. The reality was more nuanced than either reaction captured. Ducks do eat locusts. This is not disputed. In laboratory and controlled field settings, a hungry Indian runner will consume locusts efficiently, processing them as a high-protein food source. The question is whether ducks can perform this function at the scale and mobility that a locust swarm demands. Desert locusts move. A single swarm can cover 150 square kilometers and travel up to 150 kilometers per day on favorable winds. Ducks cannot. Ducks forage within a managed paddock. They operate in flooded fields where their webbed feet and foraging behavior are specifically adapted. Release them onto dry, open terrain in pursuit of a migrating insect cloud, and the system breaks down. Zhiqiang Zhang, an entomologist at China Agricultural University, noted in a 2019 interview that while the duck locust concept was biologically sound in principle, the logistics of deploying waterfowl against a fast-moving desert locust front presented challenges that had not been resolved. The locusts, he pointed out, never actually crossed into Xinjiang in significant numbers. Whether the ducks deterred them or the swarm simply turned is a question the data cannot yet answer. What the announcement did accomplish was undeniable. It put rice duck integrated farming on the front page of every major agricultural publication in the world. Zoom out from the paddy field for a moment. The global pesticide market was valued at approximately $84 billion in 2022. That figure grows every teens. In the same period, insect populations across the Northern Hemisphere have declined by an estimated 75% over the past 27 years. Data gathered from long-term monitoring sites in Germany, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. The two trends are not unrelated. Pollinators are collapsing. Soil fauna is thinning. In agricultural zones across Southeast Asia, Europe, and the Americas, the biological complexity that once made farming systems resilient is being stripped away season by season. The creatures that had previously performed pest control, wasps, beetles, spiders, birds, are disappearing precisely because the chemicals meant to suppress pests also suppress everything else. Fewer insects, fewer predators, fewer buffers, more chemicals. The feedback loop has no natural exit, unless something interrupts it. This is why the duck trials matter beyond their acreage. They represent a documented, replicable proof of concept that you can remove the chemical layer from a major food system and replace it with a biological layer and still feed people. Not at reduced yield, at comparable yield, sometimes better. By 2018, rice duck integrated farming had been adopted across an estimated 200,000 hectares of Chinese farmland. Government subsidies supported the transition. Agricultural cooperatives organized duck raising programs in parallel with rice planting schedules. Farmers who adopted the system reported average income increases of 15 to 25%, partly from reduced input costs, and partly because duck-integrated rice commanded a premium price in urban markets where consumers had become wary of pesticide residues. The ducks, after the rice harvest, were sold for meat. The system produced 2 crops simultaneously from the same land. 1 hectare of rice duck integrated farmland generated returns that conventional single-crop farming simply could not match. This was not environmental idealism. It was economics. And yet the system is not spreading as fast as its results suggest it should. Understanding why requires sitting with some discomfort. Industrial agriculture is not simply a set of practices. It is an infrastructure. Chemical companies have spent 70 years building supply chains, subsidy relationships, research alliances, and regulatory frameworks around synthetic inputs. The global agribusiness market is worth more than $3 trillion. It does not have an incentive to make itself unnecessary. In China specifically, the pressures of feeding 1.4 billion people at consistent volume on tightening land budgets with a labor force increasingly moving to cities make farmers risk-averse in ways that spreadsheet analyses cannot fully capture. Transitioning to a duck-integrated system requires the farmer to source, raise, and manage a second animal in precise synchronization with a crop cycle. It requires infrastructure, fencing to keep ducks within the paddy, housing at the field edge, veterinary access. It requires knowledge that was largely lost during 4 decades of chemical farming. And it requires time. Time that farmers operating on thin margins and set debt cycles may not have. The barriers are not biological. They are social, financial, and political. The researchers at Zhejiang University have been clear about this. In a 2020 paper published in the journal Nature Plants, scientists documenting the rice duck system's ecological performance also noted that adoption rates remained uneven across provinces, with uptake concentrated in areas where local government extension services were actively involved. Without that support infrastructure, the system stalled. Organic transition periods, the window during which a farmer stops using chemicals, but before they receive premium organic certification, represented a particular vulnerability. During that gap, which could run 2 to 3 years, farmers absorbed pest losses without the price premium that made the system economically worthwhile. Government-backed transition insurance could close that gap. In most provinces, it didn't exist. The ducks worked. The policy hadn't caught up. This pattern is not unique to China. It is a recurring structure in the history of ecological agriculture. In Bangladesh, researchers at the International Rice Research Institute documented a comparable system in the 1990s, one where traditional fish rice paddies maintained yield while eliminating most chemical inputs. The system was well documented, economically viable, and deeply culturally rooted. It was also displaced systematically by input-intensive farming supported by international development loans that came attached to chemical package requirements. In the Philippines, the same story. In Vietnam, variations of it. Biological systems that worked were repeatedly overwritten by chemical systems that were profitable to someone upstream in the supply chain. The choice was rarely made by farmers. Return to the paddy field at dawn. The ducklings released into Chinese rice fields are, in most operations, between 10 and 15 days old. At that age, they are small enough, roughly the size of a fist, to move through the base of rice stalks without snapping them. But they are already foraging with an intensity that seems disproportionate to their size. They probe, they dabble, they push through mud. They are not being directed. They are doing what ducks have done in wet, shallow, insect-rich environments for millions of years. The rice plants, standing perhaps 20 centimeters tall at release, will be knee-high by the time the ducks are removed. That removal happens around 35 to 45 days in, once the rice enters its tillering phase and the plants become too fragile for duck traffic. For a little over a month, the system runs itself. No spray schedule, no calibration, no personal protective equipment. The farmer's primary job is to ensure the ducks don't escape the paddy and to check the fencing each morning. The simplicity is disarming. It is also, somehow, the hardest thing to convince a system built on complexity to trust. There is a philosophical dimension to this that the yield data alone doesn't capture. Modern industrial agriculture is, at its core, an expression of a particular assumption, that nature is a problem to be solved. Pests are a problem. Weeds are a problem. Soil variability is a problem. Each problem generates a product, a pesticide, an herbicide, a synthetic nutrient. And each product creates dependencies that entrench the original assumption. The system reproduces itself ideologically as much as economically. Rice duck integrated farming operates from an opposing assumption that nature, properly understood and properly arranged, does much of the work itself. The duck is not overriding the ecosystem. The duck is the ecosystem, or at least a functional piece of it redirected. The farmer's skill is not in dominating biological forces, but in orchestrating them. That is a genuinely different way of knowing, and it is one that has proven at scale, in peer-reviewed field conditions, across multiple countries and decades, to produce food. Real food, in real quantities, for real people. The locusts that threatened Xinjiang in 2019 eventually receded. The ducks were never deployed in the dramatic mass mobilization that headlines described, but the fields they had already been working, quietly, unglamorously, since the early 2000s continued to produce. The soil beneath them continued to recover. The waterways beside them continued to clear. No single flock of ducks is going to reverse the pesticide crisis. No coordinated release, however large, is going to restore the 75% of insects that industrial agriculture has already consumed. Scale of what has been lost is not answered by what a duck can do in a single season. But a proof of concept is not nothing. A demonstrated alternative is not nothing. 200,000 hectares of farmland operating without synthetic pesticides, producing comparable yields, generating returns, and rebuilding soil biology. That is a data point that does not disappear. On a clear morning in Hunan province, a farmer named Wei checks the fencing around his paddy at 6 a.m. He has been farming this way for 9 years now. He adopted the duck system in 2015 after a government extension officer visited his cooperative. His yields have not dramatically increased. His pesticide bill has dropped to nearly nothing. His rice sells for 30% more than his neighbors at the provincial market. His children, he says, swim in the irrigation channel without him worrying. He does not describe what he does as ecological farming or integrated pest management or any of the terms that appear in academic papers. He calls it simply rice farming with ducks. He says it's how his grandfather farmed before the chemicals came. The ducks don't know any of this. They move through the water at dawn, heads down, working. The field behind them is clean.